Here is something that should not happen. A future king walks into a family summit that took months to arrange. A private meeting at Windsor, every senior figure in the room, the whole gathering built to settle something the family had been circling for a year. And he cancels it. Not after an argument, not halfway through, but before anyone had even sat down, in under a minute. And by every account, he did it because of a single face in that room. Someone who was not on the guest list. Someone whose presence told William in one glance that this was never the meeting he had been told it was. It was Camilla's private lawyer. And the moment he recognized who she was, William turned around and shut the entire thing down. The reason a single lawyer in a room can collapse a royal summit is the most revealing thing about how this family actually operates. And it is the part nobody has been explaining clearly. Start with what a Windsor Summit actually is, because the word does a lot of work and you need to feel the weight of it. In this family, a summit is not a conversation. It is a rare, deliberate, heavily planned event. The kind convened only when something genuinely needs to be resolved, and normal channels have failed. There is a real precedent. In January 2020, when Harry and Meghan announced they were stepping back, the family held what the press called the Sandringham Summit. Charles, William, Harry, and the late Queen in one room working out the terms of the exit. That happened. It was widely reported, and it set the template. When the stakes are significant enough, you get everyone into one room and settle it face to face. So when word circulated that a Windsor Summit was being arranged, everyone who understood the family understood the signal. Something large was being decided. This time, the subject was the future. Specifically, what happens to the shape of the family, and to certain arrangements once Charles's reign ends. Hold the backdrop in mind, because it is what made this summit feel urgent rather than routine. Charles was diagnosed with cancer in early 2024. That was announced by the palace. While he has continued working through treatment, that diagnosis changed the emotional temperature inside the family entirely. Questions that everyone had been comfortable leaving vague, questions about the future, about who controls what, about where certain people stand once the reign changes hands. Those questions stopped being theoretical. They acquired a clock. And nothing focuses a family with a lot to lose like a clock it cannot stop. Think about why Windsor specifically, because even the location was a deliberate choice. This family has several settings it can use, and each one communicates something different. A meeting at Buckingham Palace is state business, formal, institutional, on the record. A meeting at Clarence House is Charles's own ground. But Windsor is the old heart of the family, the place soaked in generations of private history, the setting they reach for when they want something to feel less like government and more like blood. Choosing Windsor was choosing intimacy. It was saying, this is family, not institution. Come as a son, not as a rival. And that framing, as it turned out, was not innocent. Because the more a room is dressed up to feel like family, the lower your guard drops. And a dropped guard was the entire point. So the summit was arranged. Months of planning, a date at Windsor, a guest list. The guest list is the whole story, and almost nobody looks closely at guest lists. The gathering was framed, carefully framed, as a family conversation. Senior family, a couple of trusted household advisors, the kind of gathering where things get talked through informally before anything is ever formalized. That framing matters because it tells everyone how to behave when they walk in. A family conversation is loose. It is off the record. Nobody is guarded. You say things you would never put in writing because it is family talk. That was the atmosphere the summit was designed to create. Warm, informal, trusting, and here's the detail worth holding. William had been given a version of the guest list in advance, the way you always are before something like this, and that lawyer's name was not on it. She had been added quietly late, or simply never listed at all, which means the plan actively depended on William not knowing she would be there until he was already in the room. If her presence were innocent, if she were there for some ordinary above-board reason, you would put her on the list. You disclose the harmless things. You hide the things that only work if the other person does not see them coming. The very fact that she was kept off the list is the fingerprint of intent. Somebody understood that if William knew a private lawyer would be present, he would never walk in. So they made sure he would not know until it was too late. Except it was not too late, because he saw her before he sat down. William walked in and noticed someone standing near the window who did not belong in a family conversation at all. Camilla's private solicitor, her own personal lawyer, not a palace legal advisor who serves the institution, but the specific individual who represents Camilla's private interests. And that single detail changed everything, because it is the hinge the whole story turns on. There is an enormous difference between a family conversation and a legal negotiation. The thing that separates them is exactly this: the presence of a lawyer. The moment a private solicitor is standing in the room, it is no longer a chat, it is a negotiation. Anything said becomes something that can be recorded and witnessed. An informal nod of agreement stops being a warm family gesture and becomes something a lawyer can later describe as consent. William looked at that woman by the window and understood instantly that he had been invited into a room disguised as one thing in order to produce another. The speed of that recognition is worth dwelling on because it is the most significant thing in the whole story, and it was over in a heartbeat. Most people walking into a warm room full of family would have registered the unfamiliar face and thought little of it. An aide, someone's assistant, a new advisor. Most people extend the benefit of the doubt because that is what warmth is designed to make you do. William did the opposite in a single glance. He saw a face he could place. Camilla's own solicitor, not the palace's. And his mind did the whole calculation immediately. Her lawyer, here, at a family meeting, not on the list, standing quietly to one side. Each of those facts is individually explainable, but together they spell one word: negotiation. He did not need to hear the agenda. The presence of that specific person in that specific role unannounced was the agenda. He read the entire summit off one face before he had taken 3 steps into the room. That is a man who has been burned enough times to have developed a genuine instinct for the shape of a trap, and it tells you how these two sides now see each other. For William to read the worst intention off a single glance, the trust has to be completely gone. He did not wonder if there was an innocent explanation. He did not give it a beat. His instant assumption was that he was being managed. And the fact that he was right is almost beside the point. What it shows is a relationship so hollowed out that a lawyer's presence reads not as a possibility to be checked, but as a confirmed situation to be exited. That is not a family with tensions. That is a family where one side now assumes the other is always quietly working an angle. William looked at that woman by the window and understood instantly that he had been invited into a room disguised as one thing in order to produce another. And that is the answer to the question the headline leaves hanging. Why cancel? Why not simply sit down and see what happens? Because William grasped something most people would have missed in the moment. The trap was not in what would be said. The trap was the room itself. If he sat down, if he engaged, if he let the family conversation proceed with that lawyer quietly present, then whatever came out of it, any softening, any apparent agreement, any moment where he seemed to go along with something to keep the peace, could later be framed as his consent, witnessed by counsel. The only way to defeat a trap built out of a room is to refuse the room. So he did. He did not debate. He did not demand explanations in front of everyone. He simply said the meeting would not be going ahead and left. In doing so, He took away the one thing the entire exercise depended on: him in a chair, on the record. What was the summit actually for? What was that lawyer there to produce? Nobody has published the documents, and the palace has said nothing on the record about what was on the table that day. What follows is assembled from accounts of who was involved and what the summit was reaching toward. But the structure gives away the intent. The summit's real purpose was continuity. That word keeps appearing in these situations, and it is always worth asking. Continuity for whom? What it meant in practice was securing Camilla's position, her arrangements, her standing, a set of understandings about property and role and influence beyond the end of Charles's reign, making the temporary permanent, locking things in while Charles was still king and still able to lend his authority to it. A structure that would carry Camilla's place forward into a reign where William, not Charles, would hold the power. The reason it had to be a summit rather than a formal legal filing is the clever part. A formal legal move would require William's explicit, documented sign-off, and everyone knew he would refuse it. But a family summit, warm and informal, with a lawyer quietly present to witness and record, could manufacture something softer and harder to undo. The appearance of agreement. Consensus in the room. A witness able to say the family had talked it through, and William had gone along with it. You cannot get a signature out of a man who will not sign, but in the right room, you might get something a lawyer can later describe as assent. That was the strategy. And William saw the board the instant he saw the player. By these accounts, the continuity arrangement bundled together several things. Certainty over which residences and private arrangements Camilla would retain as a widow, a defined and protected role rather than a quiet fading into the background, and some measure of ongoing involvement in family matters after Charles was gone. From William's side, a future king cannot have the previous king's widow holding a locked-in pre-agreed claim on residences and roles he is supposed to control. That is not continuity. That is a mortgage on his own reign, taken out before it has even begun, by the one person he would never have chosen to grant it to. And the only time you can secure something like that is while Charles is alive, while his authority can still be used to bless it and make refusing it look like a son being cruel to a dying father's wish. The clock was not just pressure. The clock was the whole strategy. Get it locked in before the power changes hands. Because once it changes hands, the answer is no. And that answer does not change. Reread the warmth of the room with that in mind. The intimate Windsor setting, the family conversation framing, the informal atmosphere. None of it was hospitality. It was all engineering, all designed to lower William's guard to the point where he might, in the flow of a warm afternoon with his ailing father, say something accommodating that a lawyer by the window could later write down as the moment he agreed. The kindness of the room was the mechanism. They did not build a hostile environment to corner him. They built the most disarming environment they could, because disarming was precisely what they needed him to be. Now, the human side, because this is genuinely tragic on every side, and flattening it into villains would be dishonest. Start with Camilla, because her fear is real and it is human. When Charles dies, her situation changes overnight and not in her favor. She becomes a widow of a former king, holding a title but losing the entire structure of support and standing that existed only because her husband was on the throne. The homes, the influence, the automatic place at the center of things, almost all of it flows from Charles being king, and the day that ends, most of it ends too. And her whole future in that new world depends on the goodwill of a man who has never been close to her and has every reason not to be generous. Imagine living with that, knowing that the moment you lose your husband, you also lose your protection, and that the person who then holds your fate is your stepson across a coldness 20 years deep. Of course, she wanted to lock things in while she still could. Fear like that does not make you a villain. It makes you someone trying desperately to build a wall before the storm you can already see coming. The mechanics of that fear are worth spelling out. Right now, Camilla is at the center of the institution. The residences, the staff, the state occasions, the standing, but almost none of it is hers in her own right. It exists because she is the wife of the reigning king, lent to her in effect by his position. The day Charles dies, that loan is called in. She keeps a title, and whatever personal wealth is genuinely her own. But the vast machinery of being at the center flows to William and Catherine, and Camilla moves overnight from the heart of the family to its edge. That is a brutal transition for anyone, and she has watched up close how this family treats the people who drift to its edge. Her window of leverage only exists while Charles is alive and well enough to lend his weight to her cause. Every day his health is uncertain. That window narrows. She is not just afraid of the future, she is afraid of the clock, watching the one source of her protection slowly weaken, knowing that once he is gone, so is her ability to arrange anything at all. And Charles wanted to give her that wall. Put yourself in his position. Here is a man facing his own mortality with clarity, who spent decades fighting to be with this woman, who watched her absorb years of public hostility at his side. The thing he wants most in whatever time he has left is to know she will be safe when he is gone, that she will not be cast out, diminished, left to the mercy of a court that never fully accepted her. That is not a scheme. That is a husband trying to protect his wife from a future he will not be there to soften. And so by these accounts he lent his weight to the summit, not as a plot against his son, but as a father trying to solve an impossible equation. How do you protect her when the only person with the power to protect her after you is the one person least inclined to? And then there is William. You cannot understand his reflex without understanding what sits underneath it. William has spent his entire adult life watching this institution try to manage, arrange, and quietly engineer outcomes behind soft words and closed doors. And he has never trusted it. Because the last time this family arranged things quietly behind the scenes, managing a situation to protect the institution's comfort, the person on the wrong end of it was his mother. He was 15 when he learned in the most permanent way a person can learn anything. What this machine does to the people it decides are inconvenient. So a room full of soft words, warm framing, and a lawyer hidden by the window is not a family conversation to William. It is the machine doing the thing the machine does, wearing the face of family to do it. His refusal was not only legal caution, it was something closer to a lifelong allergy to being managed. He was not only protecting his children's future and the line of succession, though he was doing that. He was refusing, at a level far below strategy, to be handled the way he believes his mother was handled. Diana spent the last years of her life convinced, and not without reason, that she was being managed, that decisions about her were being made in rooms she was not fully part of, by an institution that had already decided how her story would go. And her son walked behind her coffin while the same institution arranged the choreography of her funeral. So, when William, decades later, walks into a warm room designed to gently steer him toward an outcome someone else has already decided on, with a lawyer positioned to record his cooperation, that is not an abstract legal threat to him. It is the oldest and deepest pattern he knows. Wearing a friendly face. His walking out was not coldness. It was a man who feels these things far too much to sit still inside them. And here is the quiet irony that keeps landing. The intimacy of the setting, Windsor, the family framing, come as a son, was meant to reach the sentimental part of him and disarm it. But it reached a completely different part of him instead. Instead of thinking family, he thought machine. Instead of relaxing, he went rigid. The warmth designed to lower his guard is the exact thing that raised it, because warmth deployed to manage him is the specific trigger his whole life has trained him to distrust. They aimed at his heart and hit his memory, and his memory said, "Leave. Walk back through what actually happened in those 60 seconds now that you understand the stakes. The room is set. The framing is warm." Charles is there hoping this finally settles the thing keeping him awake. Camilla is there hoping the wall gets built while there is still time. The lawyer is there positioned, ready to witness whatever consensus the afternoon produces. And in walks the one variable the whole plan required and could not control, William. The entire architecture depended on him not noticing what the room actually was, on him sitting down and letting the afternoon carry him towards something that felt like agreement. Instead, he noticed in one glance. He did not make a scene. He did not accuse anyone in front of the room, which would have handed them a grievance, a story about William being paranoid and combative. He did not give the lawyer anything to witness. He simply, quietly ended it. The summit was not proceeding, and he left. Think about what that leaves behind. Charles and Camilla and a solicitor standing in a room built for one purpose, now purposeless. No confrontation to point to, no outburst to leak, just an empty afternoon and the dawning understanding that he had seen straight through it. You cannot fight a man who refuses to give you a fight. He denied them the argument as completely as he denied them the agreement. The people who are genuinely good at power in this family have learned that a confrontation gives your opponent something to work with. A version of events, a grievance, a leak, a story where you are the aggressor. The truly dangerous move is the one that leaves no story at all. William, walking out without a word, gave the other side nothing to hold. There is no dramatic quote, no door slammed in front of a witness, no account of William losing composure, just an absence. A meeting that quietly did not happen, and an absence is almost impossible to weaponize. You cannot build a narrative around a man who was calm and simply declined. That restraint is not weakness in this world. It is the sharpest tool available. There was, by accounts, a private conversation afterward. William and Charles, no advisors. Charles reportedly did not deny what the summit was. What he did instead was make the case as a father, that he was trying to protect someone he loved, that he was not plotting against his son, that he only wanted certainty for Camilla before it was too late. And William, by these accounts, did not rage at him either. He said something closer to the truth of it, that he understood the fear, that he was not without sympathy for it, but that you do not build certainty by engineering a room. That if there was a genuine conversation to be had about Camilla's future, it could happen openly, honestly, with everyone knowing exactly what was on the table and no lawyer by the window pretending to be a guest. What he would not accept was being maneuvered. The problem was never the subject, the problem was the method. William reportedly turned his father's own logic back on him. He is said to have asked something like, if this arrangement is fair, if it is reasonable, if it is the right thing, then why did it need a hidden lawyer and a disguised room to happen? Why could it not survive being asked openly? A genuinely fair proposal does not need to be smuggled in behind a family lunch. You only conceal the things that would not survive daylight. The secrecy of the method was itself a confession about the substance, and that by accounts landed hard on Charles. Because Charles is not a stupid man, and some part of him surely knew, walking into that summit, that if the plan had been clean, he would not have needed to keep the lawyer off the list. The method gave away that even those who arranged it did not quite believe the answer would be yes if they simply asked. After this, according to those close to the household, William made something quietly clear. Any meeting presented as a family conversation would from now on be exactly that, and any legal representation attending in any capacity would have to be disclosed to everyone in advance, in writing. In one move, he closed the loophole the entire summit had been built to exploit. He did not just navigate the situation. He made sure the tactic could not be used on him again. Princess Anne, by some accounts, understood what had happened faster than anyone and said as much in that direct way of hers, that a lawyer at a family meeting was never an accident, and William had been right to walk. Anne's read matters here because she is the family's great institutionalist, the one who cares most about things being done properly. For her to side with the walkout tells you this was not seen internally as William being difficult. It was seen by the person most devoted to correct procedure as the correct thing to do. When the family's own guardian of protocol says the room was wrong, you can take that as a verdict. And Anne's involvement did something else. It gave William cover. On his own, a future king refusing a meeting his father arranged could be framed as a power grab, a son flexing against a weakened father. With Anne quietly affirming that he had read the room correctly, the interpretation settles the other way. It becomes not William being difficult, but William being right. Of course, it did not stay inside Windsor's walls, because these things never do. Within days, word moved that a planned family summit had been abruptly canceled. Not the full story, never the full story, but enough. The palace said nothing specific, confirmed nothing, denied nothing, and let the silence fill with speculation, the institutional equivalent of a closed face. But here is what the silence could not fully hide. Everyone could feel the mismatch between the scale of the preparation and the abruptness of the end. You do not spend months arranging a summit of the most senior royals for it to evaporate over a scheduling clash. The effort that went in was too significant for the explanations that came out, and that gap between how much this clearly mattered and how little anyone would say is exactly the space where questions breed. So where does this leave everyone? Camilla's continuity plan is not just delayed, it is exposed. William now knows exactly what her side was reaching for and exactly how they tried to get it, which means every future approach will be met by a man who has already seen the method. The soft route is closed. The summit route is closed. What remains for Camilla is the one outcome she feared most, having to simply trust William's goodwill after Charles is gone. The exact vulnerability the whole summit existed to avoid. Charles is left holding a failure he cannot really speak about publicly. A last attempt to protect his wife that did not just fail, but revealed itself. And William is left more firmly in control than before, having demonstrated without raising his voice that the future belongs to him and cannot be pre-written by anyone, regardless of how carefully the room is arranged. But there is a cost worth acknowledging honestly, because this is where it gets genuinely difficult rather than simply tactical. By refusing the room, William also refused the conversation. And there is a real human conversation buried inside all of this that probably does need to happen. Camilla's fear is not invented. Charles's wish to protect his wife is not unreasonable. What becomes of a widowed queen consort when the reign ends is a genuine question, and a family that functions well would want to answer it with some kindness rather than leave it entirely to the cold mercy of the new king's mood. When William walked out, he did not just sidestep a trap. He arguably closed the door on the honest version of the same discussion, the one where everyone sits down, no lawyer concealed, and actually works out how to treat Charles's widow with dignity. The trap may have poisoned the well for the fair conversation too. Now that William associates the whole subject with an ambush, how does anyone ever raise it again in good faith? Camilla's people, by trying to force the answer, may have made the fair answer harder to reach. That is the quiet damage underneath the drama. Both things are true simultaneously. William was right to refuse to be managed. And the thing they were clumsily and wrongly trying to manage was a real problem that remains entirely unsolved. He won the day cleanly, but what happens to Camilla when Charles is gone is exactly as unanswered now as it was before the summit was ever arranged. All the summit managed to prove was that it could not be answered by force. It brought nobody any closer to answering it by trust. And trust between these two sides is the one currency that has been in short supply for 20 years. The most decisive thing that happened that day was a thing that did not happen. A meeting that never took place. An agreement that was never reached. A signature that was never even asked for because the man who would have had to give it walked out first. In this family, the loudest moves are almost never the real ones. The real move was a closed door and a future king who has learned to read a room before he sits down in it. In this family, power has almost nothing to do with volume. The person who wins is rarely the loudest one in the room. It is the one who noticed first what the room was actually for and had the nerve to